Thank you. Thank you so much. I didn't want to distract you from your lunches, but we put these questions up here. Maybe you saw them. I wanted you to think about them beforehand. I'm just going to touch on this middle question. What is intelligence and how does intelligence grow? And I want to touch on that because I think it's important that we all recognize that we can transfer information, we can transfer data, we can transfer what we think are facts. We cannot transfer knowledge, we cannot transfer intelligence. Those things can only be created in the mind of the learner while they're engaging with something we're trying to teach them. So keep that in mind while we get started. This is
Might not be
Oh, I didn't even see that. Excellent. So excited to get started on this. This has been a long time coming. This is the first in a series of 4 workshops. I'm sure you've all seen this. You can grab this on the way out if you haven't seen this before. There are 4 workshops. These are sort of sponsored by or provoked by the QEP that the provost put out a few years ago. And we're just trying to sort of start some conversations in the College of Engineering about active learning. The series is called the Primer for Active Learning. This first workshop is on mindset and metacognition. And the reason is that we can't expect any strategies we use to be effective if students aren't ready to receive what we want them to learn. So this first and really the second workshop is about creating environments and creating a mindset in the learner that gets them ready to learn, gets them ready to engage. So we're not going to spend a lot of time telling you what active learning is. This is one way to represent how somebody views active learning. People tend to remember 10% of what they read, 20% of what they hear, 30% of what they see. The point is that to get them to remember a lot and learn a lot, we need to get them to engage, to get them to be an active participant in their learning. The way that I like to remember this is that whoever is doing the thinking or talking is the one who's learning. So often my goal when in class is to do as little talking as possible, but then I need to find ways to get the students to be talking in a productive way. So keep that in mind while we tell you our session goals.
So just wanted to let you know what hopefully you should be getting out of this. And again, please let me know if I'm not speaking loud enough. I'm not naturally a very loud person. So we'd like you to learn a little bit about fixed mindset, growth mindset, and metacognition. Kind of consider your own mindset and how that may be impacting students. Talk about why we think a growth mindset is actually really, really beneficial and what the research also tells us about growth mindset. And then importantly, figure out some strategies for how you can incorporate growth mindset activities into your classroom or your work, and how you can also help students develop metacognitive abilities in your classroom or work. All right, so it being an active primer for active learning series, there is going to be some amount of participation from the audience, so you're all prepared. So what I'd like you to do is go to this website or go to menti.com and enter the following code. This can be done also if you are not here. And we're going to have a very brief 3-question, not quiz, that sounds punitive, a 3-question survey, and that will kind of give us the jumping off point. I don't know if quiz sounds punitive, but it doesn't sound like something we want to do over lunch. It's not fun. Okay.
You should see the question on your device, but you also see the results showing up on the screen.
And as a note, this is anonymous, as you can probably see. So please feel free to answer how you feel. Again, will have a certain amount of intelligence and they can't really do much to change it.
Just a second so we can get the full screen share.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to John for being the person to help us with tech, because otherwise we would be 100% useless and nobody remote would be able to do, see, or hear anything that we are doing. All right. Sure.
Bring up
the slide. Yeah. That was really impressive. I did not have that memorized. It's the active part of it. We did not even plant him in the audience. All right, so question number 2, being a top engineering student requires a special aptitude that just can't be taught.
Don't let the results influence with your answer.
Yes. Again, this is anonymous, so answer as you will.
It's anonymous.
It's anonymous, Rashida. All right. And finally, question 3. If a student wants to succeed in engineering, hard work alone just won't cut it. They need to have an innate gift or talent. It's very interesting. Thank you all for your active participation in this exercise. Okay. So let's flip back to our slides and talk about a little bit why we ask these questions and what it means. So these were the 3 statements that you saw in those 3 questions. People have a certain amount of intelligence and you can't really do much to change it. Being a top engineering student requires a special aptitude that just can't be taught. And if a student wants to succeed in engineering, hard work alone just won't cut it. They need to have an innate gift or talent. So these are 3 different questions that are often asked as part of a survey to figure out if the kind of survey recipient has more of a growth or fixed mindset. So if you tended to disagree more with those statements, you have maybe more of a growth mindset. And if you tended to agree, you might have more of a fixed mindset. But again, note that this is a spectrum and you could feel that it was difficult to really answer this in a strongly disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree type of way. I hand this back over to Ben to talk about what these things are.
So just to reiterate, the mindset is a spectrum, like Alison said. It's also sort of subject dependent, but let me talk about fixed mindset versus growth mindset first. So the underlying belief of the fixed mindset is that intelligence is static. You're either born with it or you're not. And that belief tends to trigger certain responses when faced with challenges, right? So if you want to avoid challenges because you just see challenges as a way that maybe your lack of intelligence will be exposed, right? You might give up easily. You see effort as just being fruitless because it won't help. You're either born with this talent, you're born with this intelligence, or you're not. Feedback is just really a way for somebody to expose your lack of intelligence rather than a way for you to learn. And as a result, if students have this fixed mindset, their intelligence might be fixed just because of their own belief system. So it's got like a self-fulfilling nature, self-fulfilling aspect to it. The other side of this continuum is the growth mindset, where the underlying belief is that intelligence can be developed, that it can grow, just like anything else, right? And if a student has the growth mindset, they might embrace challenges rather than avoid them. They'll have greater persistence when faced with challenges. They see effort as a way to become more intelligent or to gain skills. And as a result, they usually have a higher potential. They have a greater potential in their learning just because of their mindset, right? So the fixed mindset and the growth mindset are both self-fulfilling in this way. If you have the fixed mindset as a student, your intelligence is more fixed. If you have a growth mindset as a student, your intelligence is tends to be able to grow. This research came out of 20 years of research from Carol Dweck, and we're going to tell you a little bit about some of that research. One of the early studies that I think really shows what's happening here is that there was a group of young people that were given this puzzle, and no matter how they did on the puzzle, and they looked at the puzzle individually, not as groups. And after they looked at this puzzle, no matter how they did, they were either praised for their intelligence and told that they got 80% of the puzzle correct, or they were praised for their effort and told that they got 80% of the puzzle correct. Didn't matter how they did. These were split into two groups. This is what they were told. The students who were praised for their intelligence performed worse in future tasks. And a large majority asked how their peers did. So they're immediately, we're limiting their future performance and making them compare themselves to others. Whereas the students who were praised for their effort performed better on future tasks. A minority asked how their peers did, and most of them asked for feedback on how they could improve. So this is just one of many studies that show this this possibility of two different mindsets. And what this reveals, I think, is that in the engineering college, for a traditional student, for the 18 years before they show up in Driftmeyer, they've been told that they're intelligent, right? They've been praised for their intelligence for over a decade because we're getting the best students. And this is a problem that we need to sort of try to undo. They're already coming in, a lot of them, with this fixed mindset. But I think everybody in this room, everybody in the college, can take steps to counter that and push people more towards a growth mindset. This is one more study that I want to tell you about. So there's a lot going on in these graphs. What it's showing you is that everybody who had the growth mindset performed better than those with the fixed mindset. But what this is really showing is that, this is going to sound like bad grammar, girls performed more better than the boys did, right? Everybody performed better, but it has the effect of closing achievement gaps. Same with disadvantaged students. It has the effect of closing achievement gaps if everyone has the growth mindset. Also, the mental well-being of students is going to improve. If you have this fixed mindset, you're always worried that your perhaps lack of intelligence is going to be exposed. There's a lot of insecurity around that. Whereas if you have the growth mindset, you have better mental well-being, better academic resilience, increased motivation to put effort into class. All good things come from having a greater push towards the growth mindset side of this spectrum. A few things that I want to say about this. We've already mentioned that mindset is a continuum. It can vary from subject to subject. So for instance, I have a growth mindset when it comes to mechanics because that's what I do all the time. I have a very fixed mindset, for instance, in like visual art. I bought a house a few years ago. I needed to buy some paint to paint some rooms. I melted down in the Home Depot aisle where all the paints are there. I can't function in that aisle because it's overwhelming to me. If somebody helped me through that process, maybe I could do it. But it depends, right? It depends on the subject. I can have a growth mindset towards some talent or some subject and a fixed mindset towards others. And I want to be clear that we're not saying that if everybody just has the growth mindset, they can be the next Einstein. If I have the growth mindset towards visual arts, I'm not going to become Picasso. But because I have a fixed mindset, I will never reach my full potential in the visual arts, right? So the growth mindset is just a way to help people reach their full potential. That's the way we should see this mindset. So We want you to think about this as your role in the College of Engineering, or maybe for the graduate students, your future role, what you want to be when you're done with grad school. Take a minute, just think to yourselves, no talking for the first minute. Just think, how might you respond with demonstrating that they have the fixed mindset? Think about that for a minute. We'll put you on the clock. After the minute, we'll discuss at our tables. Let's bring it back together. Anybody want to report out from their table what they said at the share time? Sheeta, we're just reporting out from the conversation time.
So we talked about a couple of things. One, we talked about trying to meet students where they're at and kind of edging them on just a little bit, like, especially because when we think about students, their previous experiences, like they might have been stellar, and then they come into this experience now where they're no longer going to be performing at that high performance, and so just kind of trying to rebuild that confidence of like, you can get back to that point, but we just have to take baby steps to get there.
Yeah.
Another thing we discussed was the ungrading method, and so the idea of people, essentially, students assigning their own grade based on sort of what amount of effort they're willing to put into whatever the assignment is.
Yeah.
So those were a couple of things that we discussed at our table.
Excellent. Any other tables? Report out. Yes.
One thing came up a lot was just kind of helping them like parse out what is the problem and help them reflect on things that they have overcome in the past. As well as like offer personal experience, like reminding them that, hey, we used to be in your shoes too. I didn't do some next work overnight. It's many, many years of learning the same way you are.
Right.
And then also looking at, you know, rewarding them with a big more on effort versus performance and like grading production. And also looking at concepts where they're not have one right answer, so that there is nothing, there's less of feel to grade off.
Yeah, I think reflection is a huge key. Because I know that a lot of classes, they think every day is hard, and every day is hard because there's something new. But they just look back over the last few weeks, they're realizing they've done all of that. Gone through a lot of growth in that time.
I just wanted to add to the comment too about something that we talked about related to that, showing that, you know, we were in those shoes as well. Like we talked about some kind of showing the mistakes that we might make as teachers if we're teaching a concept. And we also talked about watching our language. You know, if we say like, oh, this part is going to be easy, but it's not for a student, and they're just gonna start off with everything else that might be coming next. And so just kind of being careful about that language.
I tell people in statics, everything in statics is simple, but nothing is easy. And I think that's 100%, because everything in there is just a little bit of true, but it's never easy. So yeah, that's an excellent point. But one more thing.
Here we have an example that's really like just asking the student like gets to see challenge that belief as we're starting a conversation.
From the Zoom, yeah, challenging the student, that's why do you think you can't succeed in this? I also like to remind students that, you know, nobody expects to pick up a violin for the first time and be amazing, right? Nobody expects to go into the gym and be able to squat 400 pounds the first time. Nobody expects to be amazing at soccer the first time they play, right? All of these things
are a process. You got to practice them. You have to put in the effort to get good at it. And this is the same thing. Excellent. Let's I'm going to hand this over to Alison.
All right, so I think we've highlighted that students having growth mindset is really, really essential for them to reach their full potential. But I think we also know that students don't exist in a vacuum, that we've probably had situations where the vibe of the classroom can change based on maybe 1 or 2 students who either have a ton of energy or maybe no energy that day. So I want to talk about some of the other things that can impact how well kind of students perform, and why we can't just throw some growth mindset at them and hope that they will achieve all. All right, so I'm going to do just a little bit of giving you the research. We love some data. I think we can agree on that. So this particular study was looking at 9th graders who were kind of struggling in like their transition to high school. So these students were divided up into a couple groups. Some were given a growth mindset intervention via computer. And then all the students in those classes, regardless of if they got that intervention or not, they had this kind of challenging task that was supposed to help kind of see the climate of the room. So does that group of students really enjoy seeking out challenges, which could be, reminiscent of a growth mindset, or maybe not? And so what the survey or what the study found was that this growth mindset intervention, which was relatively short and relatively small and self-contained, was able to reduce the fixed mindset beliefs in those students. Awesome. And also was able to improve the core class GPA of those students in comparison to the controls that did not receive those interventions. So even something relatively small perhaps has the ability to help those students reach their full potential. But this isn't the entire chunk of the story. So if you break down the data further, there are some other interesting things going on. So the researchers broke these schools out into low, medium, and high achievement schools, and then broke those schools out into environments that are unsupportive, so non-challenge seeking, maybe slightly more fixed mindset communities, versus the blue, which are supportive of challenge seeking environments. And so what you see here, especially for the low and medium achieving schools, are that if the students were in an environment where there's this kind of norm of taking risks and challenges, that they performed much better with this growth mindset intervention than students who are maybe in an environment where that was a little bit less supportive of those risks and challenges. So we can't discount the idea of peers and peer impacts on kind of how our students behave and engage in class. Right, so the other big person in the room, of course, is going to be the instructor as well. So this was a similar study. Again, they looked at 9th graders. Previous study looked at 9th graders who were maybe struggling with their transition. This study looked at all 9th graders, so just a little bit of a difference there. Again, students received a growth mindset intervention or not, but then also the teachers of those students were given some of those same questions that we saw earlier about intelligence and if it's fixed or not, as a way of understanding if the teachers themselves had fixed versus growth mindsets. And so the results from this study were also very, very interesting. So if students received the growth mindset intervention and they had teachers who also had a growth mindset, they had an improved math GPA at the end of that calendar year. If students received that growth mindset intervention, but they had an instructor that had more of a fixed mindset, their GPA did not change. And so again, a couple of key things between this study and the previous one. This was looking at all students, whereas the previous study looked at students who are maybe struggling, so maybe had a larger way to improve. But again, this really highlights that what instructors think about students, and if they think everyone kind of can reach this full potential, can really impact how students do. So you may be looking at this and saying, but we are in college, we are past 9th grade, this is very different. And I'm happy to report that people have looked at this at the university level as well. So this was a really, really big survey of 150 STEM professors at a large university and about 15,000 students. And the goal was to see if instructor mindset at the college level impacts student performance. And so these faculty were evaluated on their mindset belief, again, similar to we did to the survey we took kind of earlier today. Some of the questions were almost exactly the same. And then the course grades and student evaluations for these classes were grabbed. And again, this was over 15,000 students, so a really, really big population. And to make this super clear, this is looking at the impact of instructor mindset and not student mindset. Okay. So if we look across the bottom at instructors with fixed mindsets versus growth mindsets, we can see that there is a very big difference in how students are performing in those classes. And again, we want to kind of highlight what we talked about before. We don't expect all students to be have extremely high levels of brilliance for every single thing, but this could be suggesting that if you have an instructor with a fixed mindset, you may not be reaching your full potential. And if you have an instructor with a growth mindset, perhaps you are getting closer to achieving that potential. And you might also note that one of the achievement gap is lessened if you move from a fixed to growth mindset instructor. So this, of course, is not the whole story. So they looked at course grades, but also student evaluations. So this looked at how instructors motivated the students, how the instructors emphasized learning and development, if that student would recommend this instructor, the course with that instructor, and then if they think that how the time they spent in that course, how much time you've spent on this course. So key things to note are that there are differences in student motivation, how the instructor was seen to emphasize student learning, and kind of generally maybe how students felt about the class. But this didn't come at the cost of maybe having a much easier class. And we can't exactly tell it from this data, but at least we're not seeing classes where students don't have to put in as many hours necessarily, and maybe use that as a proxy. So again, student motivation, but not the time required by the student to take that course, improves with faculty with more of a growth mindset belief. So again, what believe about student intelligence can really impact how students perform and how they feel about those classes. So this is the, compared to other courses you've taken, how much time did this course require? So that is the one kind of question on the student evaluations where they did not see a difference between faculty with a fixed versus growth mindset. So thank you for asking. Okay. So we threw a lot of data at you, so it seems like it's perhaps time for another active learning activity. So what I'd like you to do is pair up with somebody at your table, chat with them for about a minute about how you can create an environment, a whole environment that encourages a growth mindset, and then we'll have you all discuss as a larger table afterwards. So we will hopefully get our sand going for the first minute. So what I would love is to hear 3 different ways that your tables discussed how to create an environment that encourages a growth mindset. And I'm very adept at standing silently until I get feedback, so you've all been warned. It could be 1 per table, absolutely.
For us, since we're all advisors, we think about giving the students input or buy-in to how we're gonna plan out the flow chart. Like there may be semesters where all the classes might be hard, but there's gonna be some semesters where classes, there's 2 easy and 3 hard. Regardless, you gotta devote the same amount of time to all, and if you neglect the perceived easy classes, it's still gonna not be well for you. So getting their buy-in, getting their input, and then telling them we can reevaluate. Thank you.
So I just wanted to make sure that students have a buy-in for this schedule, regardless of if they have a really fuller schedule versus a little bit more mixed, that students need to know that, you know, let's work hard regardless of the classes that we have. Thank you.
For us, we talked about how fixed mindset and need out are 2 kind of general concepts that go hand in hand, and along with that, many engineering courses are just crowded with content that no one can reasonably learn to a deep level, all in the same level. So a growth mindset that is also courageous would be reducing and prioritizing content, really prioritize what is learned well. Which would mean taking out things from the canon of stuff content. Yeah, process.
That's a really excellent, I'm just gonna summarize it for the Zoom folks, and then that will usually the idea of readout classes. And the idea of having classes so stuck with content that we know students will never actually take away all of it. So consider maybe one of the most essential things that we want to take with each class, which is kind of an excellent advertisement to one of our upcoming workshops on Dr. Design. So thank you. We're not even a plant that came in organic. I appreciate it. Julie, I'd love to know what your thoughts are.
So we had some conversation about the weed out culture, and this is more a thing not to do. But we found it interesting. 2 of us attended the same undergraduate institution. At freshman orientation, one of us was there in 1992, and one of us was there in 2017. We'll let you guess who you're there. So to your right and to your left, what if you want me here for a year? 1992. 15 at this unnamed institution involving says, look to your right and to your left, you always work to be here. From Dr. About how years that orientation or look to your left, to your right, one of you won't be here, you know, versus what they are encouraged to now is look to your left, look to your right, you all deserve to be here, which is a really, really excellent change that is really, really beautiful. So I love that process. Yes.
So right now we're using the room mic so they can hear you, so they can hear everyone. So
Thank you, John.
I just wanted to interject one thing that I meant to mention at the beginning, and it's sort of the through line for why we picked mindset and metacognition to go together. And I think it's when students are confronted with this challenge that's inevitable in engineering, there's going to be setbacks, there's going to be failure on some scale. And when they confront that, I want them to think not that they are failing themselves or that they're failures, that the strategies they're taking are failing them, that they need to examine the strategies that they're using to prepare and to learn. And so everything goes back to strategies, and that is sort of the through line to metacognition, which is analyzing the strategies that they take. It's thinking about thinking, learning about learning, and reflecting on that process. Rashida.
One of the things that I mentioned, is that in my classes, I tell my students, I want whatever grade for you that you want for yourself. I can't even learn from you, but, you know, so if it comes to a point where, you know, you're wanting to be in the class, but the output isn't reflective of everything, that's a point where it's now time to start thinking like, okay, maybe I need to try on office hours, maybe I need to get a tutor, or I need to reflect, I need to do some reflection on the strategy because my effort isn't matching my output. And another thing that we discussed was, almost kind of avoiding using terminology like failing the exam or going bad in the exam, whatever the case may be. And sort of using language like if the grade that you receive does not meet your expectations. Because that could mean you fail, it could mean you got to beat, like who knows, depending on the student, you know, what are those grades could still not meet your expectations. So if it doesn't meet your expectations, what are some things that you and I need to work together on to make sure that the next time it does meet your expectations.
An excellent point, and I also want to say that sort of that's a pitch for our last workshop on critical assessments. Just to give you an example, maybe for assessments in class, there's basically one of two outcomes: either they get a pass or they get a not yet, and there's no fail. I mean, there is, but there can eventually be that, but for each assessment, it's a pass or a not yet, and there's another chance to prove to me that they understand that content. So I love that.
All right. Thank you for all the totally not plants in the audience that have been really, really excellent and have kind of reiterated that we're happy that we picked the topics for workshops that we did. And so Ben kind of mentioned the idea of metacognition. So it's going to be the last big kind of chunk of this workshop. And we'll also note that on the way out, and we'll also email you a PDF, we have kind of a handout that has strategies for encouraging a growth mindset in individuals as well as in the classroom. And then we'll finally have kind of strategies for encouraging metacognitive abilities in your students as well. So that will be available as you're leaving / in your email sometime later this week. Okay. So a lot of times, one of the challenges that students may have as they get to college is that the things that worked for them in high school, middle school, et cetera, all of a sudden seem to not be working, right? things are a big step up. And this happens too, I think, again, when they go from their kind of freshman level classes to then their engineering specific discipline classes. It's like another big leap. And sometimes they are not prepared for kind of looking at themselves and saying, is what I'm doing actually helpful or not for me to understand the material? So we want to talk about metacognition a little bit, which at its most basic, we can just think of as thinking about learning. So how do you learn? What strategies work? But there's kind of a lot of other definitions we can ascribe to metacognition. So this can be students learning to monitor and direct their own progress. So like, what am I doing? Is it helping? What else could I be doing instead? And this, as Rashida pointed out, can help them from not just getting stuck in the same strategies that are not working for whatever class they have at hand. We can also think of metacognition as self-regulation. So again, can they plan their own learning? Can they monitor their success? And again, can they change things as needed? And this includes the ability of them to reflect on their own performance. Often this is something that's missing after an assessment. We see the numerical grade, it goes into the backpack and never to be seen again, right? And then finally, to make an individual metacognitively aware is to ensure that the individual has learned how to learn. So students get to college and we assume they've already figured this out, but that's not necessarily always the case, especially when you start getting into some of those discipline-specific courses. And we kind of just take for granted that they already know what to do, and if they're not succeeding, perhaps it's because they're just not doing the things that they know how to do to work. So our last big activity will just be brainstorming at your table. What can you do to encourage the development of student metacognition in whichever role you happen to have at the university? And we'll give you a few minutes and we'll share out, but we want to make sure we have time for a few brief announcements at the very end.
They don't have and so if you say that they make them know they don't know, so that they don't realize that they don't. Right? Yeah.
You know what I find challenging is getting them to admit that they don't know. You can show them that they don't know, and they're still, it's like, oh, I do that. Yeah, and that's the insecurity, right? That comes from the mindset, is that they won't accept the evidence that they don't know.
I think you got to know how to see.
Oh, it's not a good exam, they still want it better.
They don't.
They'll admit it by the end. Anything else?
Yeah, we council, we got the implementation around, there's one being on the northern because it's a project, which is already required. And then the student that we have is one discussion that as a student, you can lose aside that, by the way, yes, it's a project, and it happens to be industry and non-profit, whatever, but it's a learning experience. And basically just being non-intentional or asking the students, okay, yes, you did this brainstorming to solve this problem, but not you learn in doing it, just assigning those extra questions and assignments on the meta applications.
I will just point out, we're here at a time that we asked you a lot of questions and give you a lot of answers. The resources that are on Zoom are have some answers. We need to. I just wanted to reiterate
that I have to teach my dynamic students dynamics. But I should also expect that they don't know how to learn. It could be that they don't know how to learn, and perhaps I need to teach them how to learn. This is something that we can't always expect them to come in knowing. So just a pitch for the future PALS workshops. You've already seen this flyer in an email. I'm sure you'll see it again if you want to pick one of these up on your way out. There are also, we should mention that this workshop series is just a precursor to what's going to happen next spring, which is that we're gonna select 5 faculty in the college to have an intensive course redesign. That the redesign happens in the spring with coaching from Alison and I, and then the redesign will be implemented in fall of 2025 if that's the first time you teach it, or whenever you teach it next, it'll be implemented then. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested. as part of that, I know it takes a lot of time and effort to redesign a course or to design a course. So there will be financial compensation associated with that. $3,000 that can be paid out as summer salary. It does not have to go towards materials. Last thing I'll mention is that if you're interested in this stuff, the CTL has some upcoming events. One is actually tomorrow, but there are many events around active learning since this is the QEP from the provost. Thank you so much for your time and attention and participation today. I look forward to seeing many of you in a few weeks when we do the next one. Thanks.
All right.